What's up, you guys? I'm back and we are gonna be building the front end. So, I said on the last episode that we will be using page router, but I changed my mind. We are gonna use app router, the default app router. So you can go ahead and delete the pages folder, which I already did. You can also see the components here. I've added them just so I won't forget. What we are gonna be mainly focused at is this page.tsx. So I am now inside the page.tsx. I've emptied out the contents of the home component. So we are gonna be using use client in this component. So the thing about Next.js, there is a server component and there is a client component. All components, if you don't place use client, will be server components by default. These components will run on the server side, wherever you deploy the application. But server components can't use React hooks like useState or useEffect. It can't also access the window or the document or any other browser events. So placing use client on top of the file will tell Next.js that this is a client component and this component should run, or code should run, on the client side. This way we can use useState, useEffects, or any other React hooks. We could also have event listeners and browser APIs. So when should you use a client component or a server component? So you use server components if you only do fetching from a database, you use sensitive env variables or environment variables, and heavy processing that should not run on the user's device. So if you don't use any input handling, managing of states, then you use server components. However, if the component is heavy on handling user inputs, managing states, using React lifecycle hooks, and if you want to access browser APIs, then you will define it as a client component. In this case, we will define this as a client component since we are going to be handling states here. So let's set up the home page now. What I'm about, so I'm just adding some design here, and let's see how it looks. Wait, have I started my app? Yes, I have started my app. So let's see how it looks. So this is how it looks actually. So we haven't placed anything here. So we haven't placed any other design here. So this is how it currently looks. And let's place some text inside it. Hello world. Alright, so we can already see our front-end code rendering. So let's talk more about this Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind CSS, we can do it like this. It's like an inline CSS, but with short names. This min h screen, you can look at the documentation for Tailwind CSS. This will set the minimum height of this main div to 100% of the viewport height. So in plain CSS, this will look like this, I guess. Yeah, it's like this. And then BG gradient to BR. This will just create a background gradient that will run from top left to bottom right. And then so you need to define the from and to. From blue 50 to indigo 100. It's just the color of the gradient that I want to have. And I will add more code to this. So I've added another div here. So I've added this div here and I want all the text to be centered. That's why the H1 and the P tag is at the center. But I don't really like the look of it. So now I've added this piece of code just to see the title of our application, the to-do master. Organize your tasks and boost productivity. So that will seem like a legit application. So this max width 4XL. So the max width 4XL just means that we want the max width of this div. Imagine a box here. So from the leftmost side to the rightmost side, it should have a max width of 4XL. And obviously, I can't explain all of these CSS, right? There are a bunch of CSS. And you could check out the documentation for this. So you can check out Tailwind here, tailwindcss.com, and then you go to docs, and then you click here, and then you'll see a lot of CSS here, and you'll see the translated ones, meaning translated from the original CSS to Tailwind CSS. For example, the padding here, you have this, right? P number, ppx, padding, 1px, you have these at your disposal. Alright, just check out the documentation and you'll be good to go. So what do I want to add to this? Alright, so let's start commenting out our planned components. So I want to have error message here if we fetch a to-do, all the to-dos, getting a single to-do, and if we create a to-do, then I want this message to appear on top. I just want it that way so it's easier to see. And then I want to have a form here. So, alright, I want to have a form so we could add our to-dos. And then finally, I want to show all the to-dos. So the list of to-dos. And I will add a footer here. So inside our components, we need to add 3 files. Add to-do form, to-do item, and the to-do list. So I'm checking if it's visible on the screen. The to-do list here. I have this built out, but I'm still gonna explain it to you. Here, so this would still be a client component. What are we gonna be doing inside this component, the to-do list? So we are just gonna display the list of to-do items, right? So let me zoom in. So we are gonna need the to-do type and the update to-do data here, and the to-do items, which we are gonna be taking a look at later on. So we have created an interface here so that the exact structure of the props of this function, of this to-do list function, can be declared here on what this function accepts as an argument. So while we're at it, let's start from scratch. I will start from scratch. So what are props actually? So you can actually pass properties from, again, one component to another, but in our case, it would be parent to child. Since we have the to-do list now, let's import that. Add to-do form, no. Yep, this one. Since we already have this to-do list here, we could do it like this. And since it accepts a different kind of structure, and it should have these, it will have an error. Alright, you can see this. Missing one to-do list props, to-do list props, which has the to-dos on update, on delete, and is loading, which we don't have yet. Just so you could understand what props are for, let's just have a title here, and then here, title, and render it inside our to-do list. So you just, if you want to render something, you just use the curly braces. And don't get confused when we have multiple, for example here, since we had multiple fields on our to-do list props, you should place it inside a curly braces. So you just add fields here, blah blah blah. So that's how you do it. So let's pass in a title from our homepage. It says it needs a title. So what is the prop name? It's title, and we just pass it to-do list. And let's check our code. Yeah, it says to-do list. So this way we could reuse a component over and over again. For example, if we want to have another to-do list here, deleted to-dos, it's reusable, right? So if you have the same design on your code, for example, you have multiple cards here, you have multiple cards here, then you could use that over and over again. You just need to build the prop for it. For now, we are gonna delete this since it's not finished yet. So let's start building our to-do list. Let me revert back to the props that we need. So that is the concept of props. So now we need these, right? To-dos, on update, on delete, and is loading. Where do we make these on our homepage? So let's make this one. Let's not go straight to building our to-do list since we won't have anything to render there yet. So inside our homepage, we need to define these functions or those props. So we are gonna have two states here. So states in React is a JavaScript object that stores a component's dynamic data. So you need to have an initial value of the state and you need to define a setter function. So this to-dos here is the state variable and the set to-dos function is the setter function. So you can change the state or the value of this to-dos here by using set to-dos. Same thing here, is loading can be only changed or set with this setter function, set is loading. So in TypeScript, you have this use state and then you define the type of this to-dos here. In this code here, we use use state. This is a React hook. So you use it together with this declaration of the state variable and the setter function. And what we do here is we will use the use state. In technical terms, the use state will return two elements, the current state and a function to update that value. That's why we use it together with this one. So when you declare a state variable, it will always look like this, okay? Most of the time. And then we set it to an initial value just like what we did on the is loading. Let's try and create the load to-dos. And I may need to add the error one just to capture the error. So this error state variable would accept a string or null if there are no errors that is being returned by the backend. So we are creating a function here called load to-dos, and this should be an asynchronous function. So this is an arrow function here. So looking at the logic, this load to-dos will be the first one that we will be calling since we want to load the to-dos when we see our application. So what do we need to do first? We set the loading to true since we haven't done anything to fetch the data, and then we set the error to null. Although we have set the initial value to null, we could call the load to-dos more than once. So this way we could reset it to null. And then we have a try, catch, and finally here. Try means run this code, and if there are any errors in this code, you catch the error and you handle that error. And finally, so whether there is an error here or not, or if it catches any error or not, the finally will always run. So whatever it is, we always set the loading to false if it has an error or if it does not. So now we have our load to-dos. So we get the data here inside our try. We get the data. We assign the data from the to-do API that get to-dos. Let's import the to-do API. Import to-do API. If you remember, inside our API.ts, we have exported our to-do API here. And we can call this like to-do API.getToDos, .getToDo. You get the pattern, right? So it's like this. To-do API.getToDos. What we are calling is this one. Since it's an asynchronous function, this load to-dos also needs to be asynchronous. And we await it since it's an asynchronous function because it will take time. When we have the data, this is the use of the setter function. From the data that we got from our to-do API.getToDos, we set the to-dos here, the state variable. We set that data using the setter function. So this is how you will set or change or update the state of a state variable inside React. So now we have our load to-dos. So how can we call this? We can use effect. The use effect is like this. It's a React hook. It will be structured like this. arrow function, and then inside this we could perform some actions. And after that, this is the dependency. This dependency, if you put something inside it, then this use effect will trigger. So for now, we don't want to place anything inside the dependency array, so that this load to do's, this use effect here, will run when the component loads. And let's see, console log to do's. And also I will try to print the data here, console log the data. And now let's try to look at our site. I brought up the dev console here, and let me refresh it, and we have our to do, which, if you remember, we deleted the to do that I created and we left this buy groceries one here. So now, on this part of the code, the set to do's, the data, it should now contain the buy groceries, the one to do item. So let's have a checklist here. We have the to do's here taken care of. Now we need is the on update and on delete. We also have the is loading actually. So the on update and on delete. Let's create that. The process is pretty similar and familiar. On the update one, this should accept an ID and the data that will be used for updating. Let's import the update to do data here. We imported it here. This should also be asynchronous. So we set the loading again to true, since we are about to make a call that will take some time, or an asynchronous function. So we are going to use the update to do here, this one. As you can see here, it says that it accepts the update data with a type of update to do data. It's basically just like this inside our home page. So it will still accept the update to do data and the ID, since it is required for that function, or it's required for that API call to have that ID and the data of the update to do data. So here, cons updated, we perform the update and then we set the to do's. So you can have a function inside here, inside our set to do's or setter function. So it accepts a function. So it will get the previous state of the to do's as its input. And then we have an arrow here, which means that this is an arrow function. This prev.map here will basically find the to do ID that matches with the ID that is being passed to this function. It will find the to do. If the to do ID matches with any ID inside our to do variable here, if it matches, then it will set the updated value. But if not, you just use the previous value here. And again, just pretty standard catch. And finally here, and in our handle delete to do, we will just be asking for the ID. And we just call it this way since we won't be really fetching anything, and we just wanted to perform a delete. And in our to-dos, we also perform something, just like in this one, when we find the specific to-do, match it with the ID, and then update it with the updated values. So in this one, we use the filter. So this filter here, we are setting the to-dos here. For every to-do item, we filter out only the to-do items that does not match with the ID that we pass here. So that is what we are doing here. And then another catch, and finally here. So let's add that to-do list, since I think we are good to go. To-do list, yeah. And we are going to pass in the to-dos on update, which inside our homepage, it will be called handle update to do, and then on delete, handle delete to do. So you're passing in this function. All right. So in our to-do list, we will now build the front-end code for this. So this one. Since we now have the to-dos, we could determine what to-dos are completed. So we just filter the to-dos that are completed. For the total count, we just call the length. Since our to-dos is an array, we just use length here. And if there are no to-dos, then we render this div here. It will just say no to-dos yet and add your first to-do to get started. in this part of the code here, this will just display your to-dos. For example, 10 out of 20 to-dos completed. And in this part of the code here is where we render our to-dos. So we just have a map here, a map method. So if you hover on the map method here, it says it calls a defined callback function on each element of an array and returns an array that contains the result. I know it's a bit complex to understand, but let me have an example in simpler terms. Let's say you have an array of numbers. You say const number equals 1. All right, thanks, cursor. And then you want to double it. Const doubled, let's say const doubled equals number that map num equals num times 2. It will perform a function or something for each of that element, and then it will return the resulting array. So what you will expect here, the doubled will be like this: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Again, thank you, cursor. So it will process each number and it will return the resulting array of this function that we have performed here. So the num here is just the current element that we are processing. It's just an identifier of the current element. All right, so we map it. So for every to-do item, we render a to-do item. So we don't have the to-do item yet. So let's start building that. But let's take a look at our front end. It says 0 of 1 completed. But it does not render the to-do item ever so gracefully. So inside our to-do item, the to-do item resides inside our to-do list, right? Since we want the to-do item to be reusable, inside our to-do list, because we are gonna have one or more to-do items, so we just use to-do item to render that. And if you look at this, it actually rendered the to-do item, but inside our to-do item, we just placed a string. So it says here to-do item. It has no information yet. But now we are gonna be adding more information. So this to-do item here, it will just have one to-do, on update, on delete, and the is loading. We'll accept those as props. Alright, so we are gonna have the states here: is editing, set is editing, edit title, set edit title, and edit description. This editing here, we will use this later on, so we can determine that if a user is editing. This edit title and description will be used for updating our to-do item, since we can do that, of course. And let's create some of the functions here. So if you notice, inside our to-do list, we don't really use the on update, on delete here directly. We are using it inside the to-do item. So you can do that in React. This is how props are very helpful, you know. So it doesn't matter if the to-do item, in our case, will use the on update and on delete. We could have multiple components here inside our to-do list that we could just use the on update and on delete to handle that for us. In our case, the to-do item will have an option that we can delete it or we can update it. So that's why the update and delete will be taken care of the to-do item, since the to-do list will just handle the rendering of all the to-do items. So it makes sense that the do item will handle the updating and the deletion. So in this here, handle toggle complete, what this does is it will toggle the completed field. So it's signified by the exclamation mark here. For example, our original value of the to-do that completed is false. It will just toggle it to true, and if it's true, it will toggle it to false. So it will just toggle it, you know. That's why it's handle toggle. And it will use the on update. And if we trace back the on update here, by the way, if it's an asynchronous function, this is how you declare it, the arguments, and then a promise void here. And if we trace it back, we have it inside our on update, inside our to-do list, right? But our home page has that function. Handle update to do. It will accept an ID and the data to be modified or updated. Inside our to-do item, we say that we just want this completed to be updated, right? We don't care about the other fields here, since if we go back to the to-do.ts, it says here that the update to-do data the other fields can be null or undefined. So in this case, in the to-do item, it's undefined. We don't define it, we only define the completed. So it will accept that, so that we could do this basically. We could just place one field and it's good to go. So now you get how it all interconnects, right? Handle, save, edit. So later on, you will see why the title and the description is the only one being updated here. So in here, handle, save, edit, for setting the task as completed or not completed, we are just gonna have a button for it. But for the title and description, of course, it's a string, then we need to have a field for it. So that means we are gonna accept some inputs from the user. So this is just gonna be another asynchronous function here. This will just make sure that the edit title is not empty, and if it's not empty, then we proceed. However, if it's empty, we don't update. So in this one, we still call the onUpdate and we pass in the ID, and now we only want to pass in the title and the description. The title and description here, if you remember, is the state variables that we have. This will be changing every now and then when we give our component an input from the user. So you will see later on. Handle, cancel, edit. This will just handle if a user wishes to cancel that edit. So it will default to the original title and description. Or if it has no description, then we set it to an empty string. Since we are only passing one to do here, if there is no description found inside this to do item, then we just set it to an empty string. And set is editing to false. For the handle delete, pretty straightforward. We just have a window that confirm here. I know it's not pleasing to look at, but I just want to showcase how we could use the window that confirm. This will open a native browser confirmation box, which you will see later on. And that box will show this message. And if it says yes, and if you confirm, then we perform the on delete. So we trace back the on delete once again. You can find it in the to-do list. And then back to our home page, handle, delete, to do, which is just this. So it's amazing, right? We don't need to create a lot of code since we just pass it as props. And now for our UI, which I guess you're the most excited about. So now it's here. It's just a simple card. So you have this here, mark complete, edit, and delete. How about let's mark this as complete. Wow, it says 1 of 1 completed and it crashes it out. We also have the created date here. We rendered that too. You can take a look at the code here and just explore on your own how we created the UI. But in here, you will see something quite interesting, right? We use the backticks again. And then we have a condition here, actually. So the to-do that completed, we use that condition. If the to-do that completed is it says that it's complete, the to-do is completed, then we set the border to green. But if it's not, it's blue. Since this is not completed, this is blue. But if we click on this, it should be green. Alright, that seems cool to me. Now let's check the editing. So that's why we have a set is editing here. I mean the is editing here. Since if a user is editing, we want to render this one. So the format for this one, we can use the state variable as a condition to render something inside our component or not. So this is the format for it, condition. This is the common format for it. You place a condition and then you check if the condition is true. So if it's true, you render whatever is inside the parenthesis. And then if it's not, then you render this. It's like this. So if a user is editing, then we have this. Instead of an H3 or a P tag or some tags to render our string, we convert it as an input. Since a user will be typing his or her new title. And then for the value here, so we set the value that we get from this input as the edit title. So that's why when we click on the edit button, it has a default value of buy groceries, milk, eggs and bread, since it already has a value that we have set initially. And then the on change here, when you are dealing with inputs, it will contain an on change. And this on change here, it will listen for changes to an input element, to this input element. And you can define a function here inside the on change. This function will be called every time there is a change in input. Then it will update for every keystroke you have. So in this arrow function here, it should receive an event object, and we just call it E. And for that event object, we get the E, the target, that value, which is just the value of whatever we have typed. And then we set that to our edit title. Similarly, in this edit description. So we just do the same thing. And also we have a button here that will call the handle save edit. So the handle save edit, again, it will call the on update. And all these input, text area, and button will be disabled when the component is still loading. So yeah, that's basically it. You just render, if a user is not editing, we just render the title on an h3 tag and the description on a p tag. Another example here. You see this? If this specific to do has a description, then we render this. If it does not have a description, then don't render it. That's what this double ampersand means. This can be a condition as well, so it needs to satisfy this condition before we render this. And then in here, we just formatted it to the local date string, our created at field. Yeah, we already have our to-do list and to-do items already built. And what we are missing is our add to-do form. So my dog is making a lot of noise. That's why she's here. Alright, so let's continue our code. So let's make the add to do form. Since we want to add a component wherein we can add to do items or tasks, so it's this one. So this will have an on add and is loading. We already have the is loading, but the on add, we still need to build it. Alright, so I'll add this here. Handle add to do. It says import create to do data from types, which I'm gonna do. And thank you, cursor, for doing that for me. Create to do data is now here. And the handle add to do, just like what we did with the update, load, and delete, this will just perform the API call that we have defined in this one. So we can call the create to do now. So created, we wait for the creation to be done, and then we get the newly created to do. If you remember, inside our backend, so my dog is breathing on my mic. She's just looking at me. Alright, back to me. So if you remember, when we made our backend, that our post or our create will return the new to do item. And this is pretty standard. You always return what you create so that you can use that to render on your front end or to confirm that you've added it successfully. Depends. And this piece of code here, this operation here, just means that all the to-dos here, this will represent all the to-dos here, this prev here, all the to-dos, all the current to-dos here, take it as is, and then add the created one in the first index. So you are just adding it to the array of to-dos. You need this spread here. This is a spread syntax. It will take the array of the previous to-dos or the to-dos, and then it will spread them out eventually as individual elements or items in the array. So now we have the handle add to do. Moving on, in our add to do form, we have the title and description here, since we want to ask for the title and description. Also, we want to handle the submit, and that's where the on add will be useful. We just call the on add here. This title and description will also come from the user. So we create a new to-do here, which is of type create to-do data, which we created inside our types here, and then set the title and the description. So again, so the description can also be null, so that's why we have an or operator here. And then we just call the API for that. And then we set the title and description to empty again, since the on add is already done. Alright, for the handle key press here. So this will just handle if a user will press enter. But it should not be holding shift key at the same time. And this is the code for that. On key press. It's deprecated. On key up, on key down. Okay, let's use on key down. So if it's deprecated, then we should use the updated one. So the on key down, it will accept our handle key press. So if a person will press something on the keyboard, then we call this handle key press. Again, we set the value at the on change, just like what we did earlier. And then yeah, that's basically it actually. Let's just add this inside our home. Add to do form. Yep. So we'll just accept these two here. So now let's take a look at our front end, and voila, you now have this. I know it doesn't. Let me just open Edge for this one. Didn't realize it, but here you go. This is how it looks. What the heck? So you just add another one here. Finish YouTube video. Since the description is optional, we could just press add here. There you go. It says 1 of 2 completed. But what if I mark this as completed? It says 2 of 2 completed. That is awesome. Let's try and edit this. Edited. And then save. And it says edited. Nice. How about we delete this? This is what I was trying to say. The window confirmation. If we hit OK, then this will be deleted. If we hit cancel, it won't be deleted. But if we hit OK, it is deleted. Bye bye. And what we are missing here is the error message. I'll just paste it in here. So if there are any errors, then we should render it here. This is just to describe the errors that we will potentially have, and then let's just add the footer. So if there are no errors, you won't see it, of course. But if we have errors, let's turn off our back end. Okay, let's refresh it. See? Error, network error. Try, dismiss. Blah, blah, blah. So this is a network error. So that's why it's displaying that, of course. But let's turn it back on and hit retry. Sheesh! That is good, bro. So now we have completely built our front end and back end. In the next episode, I will teach you how to publish your application so that you could show this off to your friends. You can also create a whole new design. I'm just having a minimalistic approach so you could try and add your own thing to it. So in this application, we have tested the editing, the deletion, the creation, and the marking of complete and incomplete. We have tested those, and we have finally finished our back end and front end. So I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.